ladies and gentlemen. It's Eric Coffin. I'm in Vancouver on July 31st. I'm here with Brandon Macdonald, the CEO of Fireweed, Zinc, a base metal developer that I follow in HRA Advisories. Very large resource. They put out a very nice PA last year. But I think what we want to touch on today is a kind of out of left field, I guess, really, news release that you put out today about ore sorting and about a zone that isn't actually part of the resource, part of the PEA.
Yeah.
It's another zone that you picked up when you did this expansion of the projects and picked up the surrounding claims.
Yeah.
Let's start with let's start with the ore sorting. I mean, why does that matter? What is ore sorting? Why is this a big deal? Why is this worth a news release?
The zone we're looking at, the boundary zone, has always been conceived of as a large zone, but the issue was grade. It just never had the juicy grades that Tom and Jason do. But the ore sorting process, by which basically the material is broken down into sort of pebble-sized pieces, fed along a conveyor. In this case, an XRF scans them on a few different sides to get a sense of the zinc content. And then as they drop off a ledge, decides whether to send it into one bin or another. And it actually either blasts them into that bin with a blast of air or sends them with a little paddle. It's actually kind of a riot to watch. It's a very interesting process. But this is a pretty new process, particularly with an XRF.
Right.
And what it's allowed you to do is take material that is heterogeneous and say, okay, well, let me get rid of the junk material and keep the good material. And a heterogeneous zone like boundary zone turns out to be extremely amenable to this type of sorting.
Now, there's no resource yet on boundary. I mean, boundary had, 20 or 30 holes, something like that, drilled by past workers. And you look at some of these drill holes, I mean, this is a big zone. I mean, you've got drill intercepts above 200 meters, 2.5% zinc, something like that. And like you said, 2.5% zinc, big whoop, who cares in the scheme of things. But the idea with this ore sorting is what it does is most of the waste essentially stays in the pit. I mean, obviously you got a waste pile, but you don't have to run that through your plant. You're doing this big division where the good stuff is part of a much smaller unit. I mean, I think it's called mass pull is the term, and that's one of the things I noticed in this release is the mass pull number is actually quite good. I mean, I've seen this applied to 2 or 3 other projects now, some gold, some base metal projects, and getting a mass pull down to 40%, 30%. Essentially, that means if you think of the stuff coming out of the pit, going through this crusher and this ore sorter. Some of it goes to the waste pile. Yeah. Some of it goes into the truck to go to the mill. Yeah. Basically, if you got 30 or 40% mass pull, essentially only 30 or 40% of it's going into the truck and going to the mill. And the implication of that ratio is your grade should come up a fair amount. And on the initial test, you had a pretty good upgrade through the.
Yeah. So what we saw was the material that actually is assumed to be sorted. You've got about a 30-ish% mass pull, which means a 70% rejection rate. Once you then integrate the fines, and we assume that 25% of the crushed material will be fines, and we passed on to the mill. That material, once integrated, means that your mass pull ends up being about 50%.
Right.
But that means that a 50% rejection, and with only a 15%-ish loss of zinc, right? So you basically doubled your grade while only losing 15% of your zinc, which is a pretty great upgrade.
Yeah.
And this takes material from what is uninteresting to feed to the mill to what is incredibly interesting to feed the mill, particularly as you say, and people will see from the cross section in this video and the news release that this should not be a high strip zone, and it should be amenable to a big tonnage open pit, and it is a big tonnage target.
Yeah, I mean, what you can see in the area they've drilled so far, it's 200 or 300 meters wide. Several, a few hundred, maybe several hundred even meters along strike, if you want to call it that.
That's about 800 along strike.
Yeah, so I mean, that's you look at those kind of numbers, and without doing the math for you, which we're not allowed to do, it's you end up with a pretty big number. So, and the other thing that I noticed was although you do have these, when you put all these together, you have these really long, 2%, 2.5%, whatever intercepts. It is, it's heterogeneous enough within that intercept where I would think in an actual mining scenario, presumably there's something that's obvious enough visually where you could do some benching and probably actually sort of pre-sort before you pre-sort, if you will.
Yeah, and that's one of the big question marks. And boundary zone is a still early stage for us. Like I said, 24 holes, but not enough for a resource yet. And once we're able to wrap a resource around it, you'd start to be able to understand, okay, how much sorting can you do at the mining level? Then how much do you do, in a material sorting process to produce a pre-concentrate? And then that goes to your mill. So, the hope is that you get a quite nice grade material going to the mill.
Now, why, okay, that's all good. So, it's great. Like there's probably, there's potentially, from my eyeballing, tens of millions of tons of this stuff. But okay, what's the bottom line? I guess why, you're already, in this scenario, you built Mac Pass, you're mining Tom and Jason, you get these nice high grade underground zones. Why does being able to pull in, for the sake of argument, 4 or 5% zinc, this sort of stuff from an open pit, why does that matter? How's that a big help for you?
Yeah, and it's a case of, I've long said in my presentations and discussions with investors that if I add more tonnage at depth to Tom and Jason, it just extends my mine life. You might be able to find something high grade that it can be slotted in earlier, but ultimately it's about extending mine life, which does improve your NPV and your IRR less, but really the real prize is being able to mine something in parallel.
Right.
You're a bit constrained in the underground at Tom and Jason. So the ambition this summer, as we've stated, was to find a zone that could potentially be mined in parallel and ideally open pit at low cost. And boundary zone, now that we know this sorting works, seems to fit that bill. So, to kind of thumbsuck it, you'd be hoping that the boundary zone material can be mined in parallel with Tom and Jason and then campaigned through the mill, because we don't yet know enough about the metallurgy of boundary zone to know whether it can be.
Yeah, because it's a different deposit type. Right?
Yeah, it's a very different deposit style. It's much more of a veinlet hosted hydrothermal zinc lead silver system, as opposed to the stratiform finely laminated classic shale hosted base metal deposit of Tom and Jason. So it's a different characteristic. So we don't, much coarser grained, which is good, but we just don't know how that would interact with Tom and Jason. So I think a base case assumption has to be that you campaign them. And I think that if you do campaign them, that means hopefully what you're doing is you're getting a throughput and revenue increase faster than a capital and OPEX increase.
Because essentially in theory, all you'd have to increase mill capacity, but not really anything else.
Yeah,
there's the trucks.
And a mill capacity doesn't scale linearly with the mill size, right? So you improve the mill or grow the mill 50%. It's not 50% extra to build it. So
the other thing that's important too is keep in mind when you an open pit, one of the biggest advantages really of open pits is, there's a trade-off always, to pit underground, but open pits are a very scalable thing. You can go from 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 tons a day.
Yeah.
It's more trucks, more blasts, a couple more shovels, whatever. Underground doesn't really work that way. You get to the point where you quite literally start getting in your own way, and trying to go from 5 to 10 to 20,000 tons underground is a really major exercise and not even possible sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that, like new tonnage at Tom and Jason adds to the mine life. New tonnage at Boundary grows the mine throughput. And that's what makes this study, in conjunction with the new thinking around boundary zone, perhaps the biggest game changer for this project yet.
Yeah, because if this works, this is not year 15 stuff. This would be, let's grow our production by whatever, 20, 30, 40% right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Revenue goes up that much right out of the gate.
Yeah.
CapEx hopefully doesn't go up that much. It shouldn't.
Yeah.
You're not replicating a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So this has the potential to be a really big deal. Now obviously you just sort of got onto this. You just delivered the preliminary ore sorting results. What else can you do and deliver this year?
So we'll do 2 holes into boundary zone this year.
Okay.
That's the hope. And about 1 to 2 tons of that material will go into a more robust sorting study, which will be done on a full-size machine. and we'll also do some metallurgy on that to really get an idea of what the processing characteristics of it is. And that's going to, work us towards being able to integrate something like this into an economic study.
Okay, and the idea is you would, if this is still working as well as it appears to be now, you basically get up there as soon as you could next year and just whack some holes into this thing to get the right spacing and come up with a number.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's potentially a pretty big deal. I mean, you look at the, keep them, if you think of it going through this ore sorting, you're essentially dealing with open pit material that's, it's got an NSR of $80 Canadian. It's $100, $115, whatever a ton top line, which is pretty high for an open pit. And if you're delivering that to a mill, you've upsized, but you don't have to recreate the road, the camp, the tailings, like all of that. None of that stuff changes. It's basically the mill and some trucks and stuff. I mean, I could see how this would have a pretty big impact on the economics. I mean, it's a bigger potential add than anything I thought you guys would be able to come up with this year. Quite honestly.
And it's something that I think people are a little surprised, and it's going to take, I think, a little bit of a thinking cap sometimes to understand the implication of this. But to my mind, it's huge.
Yeah, I think it's great news, and you still got you got all of your exploration news ahead of you. Yeah, you haven't got anything out yet. Yeah. But there's stuff in the lab now. I assume there's a bunch of holes. Yeah. We know there's holes down, but those will be on the way over the next 2 or 3 or 4 months as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds great. I think it's great news, and it's not an easy base metal market. It's nice to see somebody deliver something that's got this much potential into a base metal market where people want you to give them big news.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for listening. Like I said, July 31st, 2019. Very interesting piece of news out of Fireweed Zinc. It's not, it doesn't have the obvious economics like a drill hole or whatever, but this is actually pretty, potentially this is very, very important news that could actually have a very large material impact on the PEA and the valuation. I know everybody's obsessed with gold right now, but I mean, Fireweed's a great deal with a great structure and a great project already has good economics. This will just make them better. I think it's worth looking at. It's FWZ on the Venture Exchange, Fireweed Zinc.